of these where I can't see the audience, or at least how many are there. So it's so interesting. But welcome and hello. We're so happy to have everyone here today with us. I'm Annie Buckley. I'm the director of the School of Design here at SDSU and also the founder and director of Prison Arts Collective. And it is such an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you today. I cannot wait to speak with this incredible group of panelists who have joined us. And especially, of course, our filmmaker, Cathrine, who's the director and producer of Aggie. And we have a great panel, so that we're gonna hear from them soon. I personally still remember sitting at my desk and reading in the New York Times that Agnes Gunn had sold a Liechtenstein painting to start the Art for Justice Fund. And I had been facilitating classes in prisons throughout California for about 4 years by then. So I always was wondering, why is this so separate from the contemporary art world, which I'm also very engaged in through being an artist and art writer. They just seem so split. So when I saw this, it just felt so inspiring and moving because, as you know, from watching the film, Gund was a longtime president of Museum of Modern Art, and so for her to make that connection and create these spaces and opportunities for the arts community to engage with this goal of ultimately ending mass incarceration was just so moving and beautiful. And I've been excited to see what they've done since. So I want to welcome all of our students and also Professor Tina Yapeli, who has brought her class, and other faculty who have brought their class and included it in the curriculum. I also want to thank Christina and Marcus of Aubin Pictures, as well as Mara and Josh from the School of Art and Design, and Kimmy and Sophie from Prison Arts Collective, who all helped to bring this event together. We're also grateful to the Jack Webb and Joan Schlossman Fund for supporting this screening and panel. So we're also joined today from the college, our Dean Peggy Shannon, as well as the Director of Development, Elise Morsch. So welcome. We're glad you're here. And with that, I want to share a little bit about our plan for the day. So in a moment, our panelists will be introducing our panelists. From there, I'm going to ask each one a little bit more in-depth question, and then this will be followed by some more conversational questions. And then at the end, like the last 15 or 20 minutes, whatever, we'll see how it goes. I'm going to be taking questions from you all. So if you have a question during the film, you can go ahead and type it in the Q&A, and we'll be going through and we'll answer as many as we're able to. So with that, we'll go ahead to our panelists. So I'm going to give a little brief introduction of our guest of honor, and then also introduce everyone briefly, and they're going to share a little bit about themselves before we start. So we have with us Cathrine Gund, who's an Emmy-nominated producer, director, writer, and activist, and the founder of Aubin Pictures. Her media work focuses on strategic and sustainable social transformation, arts and culture, HIV/AIDS, and reproductive health and the environment. And if you've look through the invitation, there's in-depth bios on all of the panelists, so I encourage you to do that. She has also and continues to serve on the boards of numerous organizations, including Art for Justice and Art Matters and many others. So I'll go ahead and say everyone, and then they'll say a bit about themselves. We also have Dr. Niyi Coker, who is
hi.
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 Our professor and the director of the School of Theater, Television, and Film here at SDSU. So welcome to both of you. We also have Adnan Khan, who is the co-founder and executive director of Restore Justice, a nonprofit organization he co-founded while incarcerated. And we have Eva Struble, who is an associate professor right here in the School of Art and Design. And an incredible artist as well, who has exhibited many places around the country and world. And we also have Mark Taylor, who is, I'm privileged to have been his professor when he was in our prison arts collective arts facilitator training at Ironwood Prison, and could not be more pleased with not only his teaching then, but how he's continued to grow and teach, and is now a full-time student at Humboldt State, and also working for Anti-Recidivism Coalition. So welcome to all of you. And let's see, let's go ahead and start the questions, and you can do a little more intro at the start. So I'm going to start with you, Kat. Congratulations, obviously, on your amazing film. I really like the way that you honor and highlight this act that your mother did through this film. And I was just curious, like, it's not about your relationship with your mother, but I don't think anyone else could have made this story in the same way. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what it was like to make this film about Agnes Gund, this iconic person in contemporary art, but at the same time to make a film with and about your mother. So did you learn anything new? How did it experience? How did your experience on this film differ from the many other really vital documentaries that you've worked on about social issues, including Dispatches from Cleveland about the murder of Tamir Rice, an issue that tragically continues to plague our country?
That's actually a big, huge question. I want to start, Annie, by thanking you for your years of work of really trying to melt the walls, as we like to say, making sure that there are voices inside that are heard outside, making sure that there is some semblance of the outside that is able to be shared with people who are being denied so much. And I also want to say how exciting it is for me to, even though we can't see you, to be speaking with so many students. It is my favorite thing to do, mostly to listen to you, not to speak to you, but to listen to you. So I do hope you all will jump right in on the Q&A and make the best sense of this incredible group of people that you have on this. It's a really beautiful panel. It's a total honor to be able to share my film with you. And I would say that starting at the end of your question, moving backwards, you know, Dispatches from Cleveland, which was about the murder of a 12-year-old boy by police in Cleveland, Ohio, in less than 1 second, who was playing in a park when he was murdered. That film that I made is also actually about a mother. She's obviously not my mother, but I partnered with Samaria, who is Tamir's mother. And, you know, so when people say, what did I learn? Sometimes I thought at the beginning of making this movie that I was going to learn something about my mother. And we are very close, as Adnan knows. And, you know, I feel like I probably know her better maybe than any other living person right now. And I did learn a lot, but mostly what I learned was really fundamental emotional things about parenting and about trust. And I've made documentaries my whole adult life. And yet there was an element of me really, you know, and so I feel like when we make films, there's a lot of filmmakers in the audience, there's filmmakers on the panel. When we make films, we know that it's not objective, that there is no truth, that it is what we're making something that is our opinion, our expression, our frame. You can include some things and not others. Obviously, there's a realness to the fact that you didn't necessarily script things, but you're making plenty of choices. And what I thought here, I knew that I was going to make a unique film, but I really would agree with you, Annie, that there is no one else who could have not only not made this film, but no one else could have made a film about Aggie. And that's not only because she's notoriously a reluctant subject, and obviously I make a point of trying to foreground that in the film because it was the central challenge to making the film. But I think it's also because at the end of the filmmaking, I didn't want to ask her while we were making it because I kept thinking maybe she just didn't know we were making a movie and that's why I was allowed to do it. So I didn't want to talk about it too much because I thought she'd, wait, we're making a movie? Stop. But once we were done and I asked her, I said, why did you let me make this movie? And she said, you asked me. because you asked me. And I thought there was so much to that because I have 4 children as well. And I know that I intrinsically trust them to have my best interests at heart. And that the fact that it wasn't just like, oh, she might trust Adnan, she might trust other people. She believed that I wouldn't have asked her to do it if it didn't make sense. And that was really moving to me. And that was the biggest lesson I learned, is that parenting, and I think it comes out in the film, parenting, as we know, children think their parents know everything. And parents know they don't know everything. But the big secret is, when are they going to let you in on that? Adnan, who has a tiny baby, Adnan knows everything. And we'll think that probably for another 10 or 15 years if you're lucky. But at some point, that child is going to be like, oh my God, he didn't know what he was doing because he'd never done it before. And so I think in that way, it was a big lesson, and it taught me something about the phases of being human and the importance of generation, and even how we access history, and how important it is to understand your history so that we can control the future. And I would say even to realize that the people who control the narrative right now control the history, control the past. So the people who control it now are controlling the past, and the past gets to dictate the future. And that's why we got to get with the narrative.
Thank you so much. It's really beautiful to hear about, how you worked with her to make that. Niyi, you're also a documentary filmmaker, and you also put a focus on issues of racial and social justice in your works that have been made nationally and internationally, like your film Black Studies USA and Human at the Zoo. So maybe just following up on some of what Kat said about, about framing the future through the past. Can you speak about the power of documentary film to tell a story and initiate dialogue?
Yeah.
And how do you see Aggie, functioning in this way of inspiring dialogue?
Yeah, Aggie, I mean, I saw Aggie twice in the last 3 days. And I just want to say it struck many chords. And one of the most powerful things talking about art is empathy. But when you go back to the earliest civilizations, when you look at people, when we look at the origins of humanity, the remnants of how we study how people evolved is through the art they left, through the crafts they left. And so that is really integral to human life, is art, the creation of art in one way, shape, or form. And art in many ways talks about, and I know Aggie said, well, I kind of don't believe in God. And she didn't mean that in a bad, negative way. She meant it in the sense that she believed in the spiritual forces, because she was beginning to question a lot of the human condition. And if, okay, art has to be connected to spirituality somewhere, someplace, but we can't define it. But to deprive people of that, which I think really got to her. I mean, I know it got to her because she decided to make a change. And in watching through that process, my mind went back to, she was kind of looking at the United States and incarceration and the whole process of deprivation of art in the public schools, where, but my mind just went back to look at South Africa. And it's always easier for people in the USA to look at other people and go, oh, look at what they're doing over there. In South Africa under apartheid, it's written in the apartheid laws that when you start a Black school or a colored school, you cannot teach art, you cannot teach theater, you cannot teach dance. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is it frees the mind. It begins to give you not just illusions, but it gives you hope, it gives you dreams, it gives you aspirations. Once you start painting, once you start sculpting, once you start acting, once you start writing, once you start performing. So as a result, in the apartheid years in South Africa, and of course they learned that from the USA, USA segregation. But what was done in South Africa was deliberately in those schools, in those institutions, that were devised for colored, if you understand the term, mixed or Black children. There was no art, and it was written into law that you couldn't have it. So even at the end of apartheid, those schools are still struggling with now, because not that they were giving more money. It was like, okay, apartheid is over. Oh, well, where do we start with art? Where do we start with dance? And the fact that Aggie could see that this was something, this was an entity that had to be part of human spirituality. It's how we connect to the cosmos. It's how we relate to the universe. It's how we define our aesthetics. It's how we define how we connect to all the humans around the world. Music, sometimes people sing and there's a language in it. There's an artistic language, some part of us that we really can't define. This is how art affects humanity. This is how art affects us. And this is how documentary, so in terms of documentary filmmaking, we go back now and then we look at parts of human history and human achievement and human suffering and the human experience, and try and lay down for people to kind of sit back, because they probably have not had that. We just had an election. 70+ million people voted on the side that's making a lot of us go, whoa, how is that happening? Do they really believe in, the denigration of a group of people? Or what is really going on? And I think this is where art comes in, the power of art that, speaks that truth, that human truth. And your documentary it told so many truths on so many levels that I think it's worth watching 3, 4, 5 times over and over again to really understand the essence of where we are going as humans. This is critically important. W.B. Du Bois in 1905, in a book called The Souls of Black Folk, said the major problem, 1905, we're just beginning the 20th century, said the major problem that would follow the United States into the end of the 20th century would be the color line. Because this is a problem, he said, that's been here since the 1600s, and it hasn't been resolved in 1905. But guess what? We're sitting here in 2020, and we're talking about that same problem, which might well be the demise of this continent as we know it. And Aggie picked up on that. That, if we want to liberate humanity and we want to liberate ourselves for the future, she did the sacrifice, and I think that is phenomenal. And I'm still speechless. I think more people have to see this. And
Thank you so much, Niyi, for that. It's so beautiful the way that you frame and discuss art, because I saw everybody nodding here in the panel and maybe in the audience too. It's exactly what you're saying, and that key to freedom, to free thinking, to the cosmos, like you said, so cool. And that just definitely makes me think of what I love so much about my work, getting to work with people who are experiencing incarceration and getting to open the doorways to the opportunity to express themselves through art. It's just shocking how much it brings change. But I don't want to speak about that. I want to go to our panelists who could speak more about that. So I'm going to start. I'm going to go to Adnan and Mark next, because both of you have been in that experience making art in certainly the most difficult of experiences while in prison. Adnan, you have become a very powerful advocate since you have come out, and also while inside, for people experiencing incarceration, and founded Restored Justice, as well as production company First Watch while incarcerated. And I was really intrigued about the filmmaking piece, and in relationship to today, I thought we could talk about that. So for me, when I visited prisons all across California, people often ask us to share their artwork with the community. And at first we said, oh, well, we're just teaching classes, we don't also do exhibitions. But ultimately we found ways to do that. And we have done multiple exhibitions and books since. And the whole reason why is they kept saying to us, we want to share our voices. We want to show that we're not bad people. And I used to think, well, what do you mean? You know, of course you're not bad people, but those negative stereotypes are just so powerful and impactful. So I was just really curious and want to see some of the films. So if you could speak about like what inspired you to start First Watch and what it was like to create those films while experiencing incarceration.
Yeah, I mean, when you asked maybe a general public, what is your source of information when it comes to incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people? Where do you get that information? Do you have a family member incarcerated? Do you know somebody intimately that has done jail or prison time? Or is your source of information media, movies, sensationalized Hollywood, the news, and the labels that you use to describe people such as quote unquote inmate, prisoner, convict, felon, ex-felon, murderer. Those labels and words and languages, they have, first of all, intentionality behind the words that we use and meaning, and then association. And because of those words, meanings, associations, we're allowed to treat people a certain way or continue the treatment of people a certain way. And it comes down to, I feel like it's cliche now, but I still think we don't understand the layers of humanizing people. What does that even look like? What does it mean to humanize someone? And then on top of that, I just want to say the importance of First Watch and the parallel I found with the documentary Aggie was, who is telling this story? Who is the artist? Is the artist impacted? And I think that impacted artists have, this is not to discredit any artist at all. This is just to highlight and increase the value of impacted artists, in the sense that I believe that we have a much more, we have a different sensitivity to certain issues. Different abuses stand out like a sore thumb to people who have been on the other side of abuse. And so like we understand, I feel like I can't say we, I understand power a little differently because I've been on the other side of it. I've been on the side of abuse of power many times. I'm not sure if I can say that for people who have held power for a long time, if they understand abuse. And so when Aggie was created, or how Aggie, or who created Aggie, was Kat. Not just someone who knows Aggie, but Aggie's daughter. When I created First Watch, First Watch is basically a project of currently incarcerated filmmakers. Now it sounds crazy, but somehow, some way, we convinced the administration to allow for us to get donations for brand new equipment, camera equipment, computer, software editing, sound editing software, and allow us to literally walk around the prison, obviously supervised, and film our own narratives, our own 2-minute pieces or 10-minute mini documentaries. We were the journalists. We were the cameramen and women. We were the people who were the editors and original sound. So everything that you see that is created from this project First Watch is done by a currently incarcerated person. And last thing, I'll just kind of close off this part by saying the sensitivity part that I was talking about and the importance of impacted artists in our society is that, for example, one thing we don't realize when making film, for me, my art is film, and it requires video, it requires editing, it requires camera angles, lighting, sound, all of the storytelling, dialogue, writing. It requires all of those things to create one piece. And when you get incarcerated people, for example, I was housed in a cell that I looked at. Talking about sensory deprivation, there was a gray wall in front of me for several years. And what that did for me was had me rely on my other senses. So I would know when a certain officer is, when this shift change and a certain officer comes on, because I know how this officer walks with their keys. And I could be on the 5th tier, which is the 5th floor of a prison. And all the way down the 1st floor, I could hear, Officer Johnson's here. Or I know a certain officer, how they walk with their boots. Some walk very heavily and fast. Similarly with lighting, I was in a cell where, like I said, all I could see was in front of me a gray wall. But during the evening time or nighttime, because of the tier lights, I could tell if somebody was 10 cells or 15 cells away from me because the way the light on my wall would shift or change. So I would know that somebody's coming. Now imagine implementing that in film, meaning like having sensory deprivation and coming from a person who understands lighting and creating like, okay, you know what? I'm telling a story about being conflicted in life. How about use the lighting of have half the face lit up, half the face dark, right? And just using that type of very direct and meticulous art in highlighting and using our sensory deprivation and things that we're sensitive to tell our story. And on top of that, additionally, I mean, with the narrative of how we want to share the story. So that's the purpose of First Watch. And I want to, you know, the valuing of impacted artists.
That is so fascinating. I'm so excited that you were able to do that because it is quite a feat, I will say, for anyone who has not been in or in any way in a prison to have put that together and be able to do that is pretty incredible. And yeah, I hear you on that language too. It's so important, and it's so interesting how our society uses language in general and specifically around incarceration. So I think it's something, you know, for the panel to consider, for the audience to consider. You know, we only say participants for our students because we also have college students. So just to distinguish, we say participants for those who are incarcerated. And we just really make a strong effort to do that. But one of them, or a former one, and also a peer facilitator is here today. And I'm so happy to see you here in this context. And it's been so cool to see what you've done since, Mark. So yeah, as you mentioned, or we were talking earlier, we met while you were a student in our program. And on top of that, you were a peer facilitator. And you taught one of the most incredible classes that I've seen. So for people who don't know, we have a Prison Arts Collective has an arts facilitator training program where we go into the institutions and teach a 60-hour in-depth teacher training that brings in conflict management and course development and engaging students and what have you. And so Mark was in that class and was also a teacher. And now he's a full-time staff member at anti-recidivism with the Hope and Redemption team. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about that class because I thought it was so incredible. So I was really inspired by the way that you integrated the arts, which for you is creative writing, together with what you were learning in other rehabilitative groups. So we all know, and Niyi spoke earlier about like, and Adnan was speaking about it, just the power of art to use our voices and to express ourselves. But you were able to merge that with like really specific tools you learned in other rehabilitative classes. And when I saw you teach, I felt that it really had a deep impact on your students. So can you just talk about your class that you developed and why was that important to you to do and how did your students respond?
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Annie. It's surreal to be on this screen. You know, just 2 years ago, I was sitting in prison with a life sentence. I think I was 16 years into that sentence when I met you at Ironwood State Prison in the middle of the California desert. I don't know if you remember, it was super hot in that classroom.
I do.
But everyone still showed up. So yeah, I was released from prison around 2 years ago. And when I was released, I decided to go to Los Angeles because that was the epicenter of the criminal justice reform movement. And I wanted to enter that space and advocate for our brothers and sisters who are still incarcerated. And then I began working with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition as a Hope and Redemption team life coach. And what we do is we go back inside prison and facilitate classes that help individuals get home to their families. All of us had life sentences at one point. A lot of our students have life sentences. So we kind of want to illuminate that pathway to freedom for our students. And then as I studied the Prison Arts Collective and learned a lot from them about creative writing, I decided to integrate that into the rehabilitative process because it was the perfect fit. So I ended up coming out here to Pelican Bay State Prison, which is California's only super maximum security prison. And I know a false narrative surrounds that prison about, you know, these are the worst of the worst, the savages, and this, that, the other, when in reality, it's just some human beings who made some errors somewhere along their life. And they're good people. They just need to be given the tools to get home to their families. So I was thinking with the creative writing classes, what we help them achieve is insight into how they got into a point in their life where they thought committing a crime is okay, because that's something the board requires for a lot of our students. They have to sit before two gubernatorially appointed commissioners who basically rule whether they can get out of prison or not. So we want to teach them what is necessary to get the insight to be found suitable for release and to come home to their family, just like I did. And the way we do that is through creative writing. We have them explore their past, their childhood. We have them explore what led up to the crime. We have them explore the crime itself. And then we have them make a meaningful amends plan, which we call a MAP, which specifically outlines how they can make amends for their past transgressions. And this is something that most prisoners naturally want to do. After they come to terms with their past, they want to make amends for the harm they caused. So we just create that space for them. The students are real receptive to it because all they really needed to be given was that space. So we give them the space and we help them along the process. And a lot of times they have these answers within them and it's really just drawing it out. So we'll be introducing the Prison Arts Collective classes in the Pelican Bay here in the very near future. I know the students will be very, very responsive to it, but I just love the arts. I love creative writing, and they're doing some amazing work already in Pelican Bay as far as art goes. So we'll just be enhancing that process. We look forward to the introduction, and we'll help get some people home because at the end of the day, I believe in, ending mass incarceration, one person at a time. So that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And it was actually even more surreal about a month after Mark got out, maybe 2 months. We were in Sacramento together and outside Governor Newsom's office. We had an exhibition of work from Prison Arts Collective, and then we were together with Anti-Recidivism Coalition with Sam Lewis. We're in the Senate floor receiving a recognition. And Mark was like, wait, I was like inside prison like a month ago and now I'm on the Senate floor. So it's a very cool moment. So I want to bring Eva into the conversation before we kind of open it up a little bit more and just ask you, Eva, to focus a little bit on some of the art in Aggie. We've talked a lot about the meaning and the social justice, but wow, there's so many just array of contemporary art and artists all throughout. And obviously Agnes Gunn was a pivotal figure in contemporary art. So just from your perspective as an artist and professor, can you speak a little bit about the impact of the film for art students and how you think this decision to sell the painting to create this Art for Justice Fund will impact the art world and collectors?
Sure. First of all, it's a huge honor to be on this panel with all of you, Mark, Adnan, Cathrine, Niyi. It's so interesting and moving to hear you all speak. I think a big takeaway for me about the film, I would kind of follow up on what Niyi said about empathy, because that was really the first thing that came to mind when I was processing it afterwards, and really art's power to increase empathy. And I think it happens in multiple ways. It's both a way that you can increase a viewer's empathy, right? And I think we really see that with Ms. Gunn, with Agnes Gunn. You see, it seems like her mind opening to new perspectives in the documentary, and it feels like there is this opening to empathy. I think there's also the idea of, maybe some kind of economic empathy where if you have the privilege and the funds to be able to create opportunities for people, like she did, that's sort of like another kind of empathy, right? These kinds of organizations for art in public schools, around HIV/AIDS, around prison justice. And then thirdly, the idea that art really gives us empathy for ourselves, and that it can be a really reflective, deep dive into our own memories, psychology, upbringings, all of these things. So the idea that empathy can really be this outward facing thing, and it's also kind of an inward thing too, right? And maybe those are both important to achieve the other, right? Like maybe we have to have empathy for ourselves in order to have empathy for others. Yeah. You asked a multi-pronged question. The idea of what impact could this film have on the art world is a huge one. I think if I think about what impact could it have on collectors, the idea of, I would hope that it would allow collectors to see their privilege and use it wisely, right? So I think that it definitely has the potential to do that. Yeah, that would be, that's my answer to your question.
But that's huge. I had something stuck in my throat. I'm so sorry. That's the only reason to turn off. No, that's so important and so vital. And so I hope it does too, because it's what shocked me the most is like, how is this kind of the first time this has happened? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, these people who have this level of privilege, I just feel like, and she speaks about that in the film, how people don't want to talk about it, like to acknowledge privilege is somehow, I don't know, it's like, we know you have it. But so I guess this kind of does relate to one of the questions I wanted to ask all of you, which has to do with if somebody wants to make a difference. Like, I often have people asking me, well, okay, I want to do something to make a difference, but what do I do? Like, there's so many problems, there's people who are homeless, and there's mass incarceration, and there's climate change, and like, oftentimes people will get overwhelmed and maybe freeze up and not do anything. And I think that could potentially be where that's coming from, that idea of not like acknowledging privileges. So yeah, what would each of you say to somebody who was in that situation, wanting to find a way to make a difference, and maybe they don't have the means to make a big donation like we see in the film Aggie, but maybe just through time or anything? What would you all say to someone who wanted to make a change, make a difference in the world in some of these intense issues that we're talking about?
I don't want to go first, but if nobody jump in, I know you all have lots of things to say.
I'll go after Catherine.
Okay, you go first, Mark. I'll go after you, please.
I would say you have to get proximate to the issue that you care about. I remember there was a part in the film where one of the individuals was asking Agnes about saying, basically, there's some individuals who think our criminal justice system works just fine, right? And then she asked him, well, have they ever been to a prison? Like, have they ever went inside a prison? So I would say whether you're an advocate for fair and just criminal justice reform or you're an advocate for harsher prison penalties, I would encourage you to go into a prison or a juvenile hall and meet these individuals, in a lot of cases, these children, and see, do you still feel the same way when you leave that prison? I think that's very important. Also, it's important that you vote, right? Here in California, just 2 weeks ago from today, my right to vote was restored because the California voters voted yes on Prop 17. Without that, I wouldn't be able to vote for another 5 years of my life. And I've already been out 2, so it would have been 7 years. And throughout my entire incarceration, I wouldn't be able to vote. So I would encourage individuals to be active in that space, understand what's on the ballot, educate yourself about it, and vote for compassion, vote for fairness. That's how we change the systematic issues we currently face, because now 50,000 people who could not vote 2 weeks ago in the state of California, most who were minorities, can now vote. And as a Black man, I'll tell you, that means the world to me, because I felt like I was disenfranchised my entire life. And when that happened, I literally cried. So I would say those 2 things: get proximate to whatever issue you care about, and additionally vote. Thank you.
That's powerful.
Okay.
Catherine, did you want to go?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. Mark, I'm so glad you said all that, because it's super practical, but it's something everyone can do. And it's easy for people to get hung up on, I don't have a $165 million painting hanging on my wall. There's like 10 people who do. And we all do something. And I love what you said, Annie, about, it's so obvious. Wait, was that, or Eva? Who said that? Annie, you said that, right? That it, like, you can't believe nobody's done this before. And what it leads me to think about I do think as Ava makes so clear, that activists are artists, that artists are activists, people who are imagining something that doesn't exist and working to make it go there. And I would add to that everyone's also a philanthropist. And we've certainly learned that over the last year, is this notion of mutual aid, that people know that in the end, we have to take care of each other, and that it's what we can do by working together. But I think in a less kind of structured way of thinking about it, to me, it really is about changing the narrative. And if we're thinking differently, like, Mark, you point out one of my favorite parts of the film. If we're thinking about changing our minds, that's really what we have to do. And then we don't look at art, for what Ava was talking about, we don't look at art as being so transactional, that it's really, there's all this intention behind everything, and we all have intention. And we can look at something and say, do I want that the intention of this $165 million to live on my wall, or do I want my intention of the end of mass incarceration to be the dominated narrative? That it's not about buying and selling and waiting for art to increase in cost. It's not about flipping it or treating it like it's a stock investment. It's really about abolition, honestly, is being able to look at something that I think if people use their imagination, anybody would agree with. How could you not agree that we should all have safety? We should all have fairness. We should all be able to live to our full potentials. We should all be engaged and able to participate and contribute to our communities and our families. That's what abolition is. It doesn't have to be like a big scary thing. Maybe how we get there is confusing and people don't know the way. But as people have pointed out time and again, slaves who escaped did not know. Harriet Tubman did not know what it looked like on the other side of slavery. That did not stop her from knowing she didn't want to stay where she was. And I think that if we can agree that we don't want to stay where we are, that there's no justice, no fairness in the current situation, then we have to start imagining changing our minds to imagine we don't have to do anything else. We don't have to make $165 million so that we can be a big philanthropist. We just have to imagine.
Yeah,
that is so incredible.
Very powerful. I would add to that I mean, real great points you make there, Mark, because going to Selma, Alabama changed my opinion about voting. I probably, was kind of, when I wanted to vote, I'd vote, and when I didn't want to, I wouldn't, but, having done that trek to Selma from Montgomery and seeing the Selma Voting, Rights Museum and understanding what happened and that people died practically. I mean, I have, so many horror stories in my mind about, having lived down there. The one part that I think is pretty critical to changing the whole dynamic really for all of us has to be the educational system. That is really where the problem is. I mean, we're talking about labeling, we're talking about dehumanization, we're talking about those others, we're talking about inequity, we're talking about not really understanding, one another or understanding the histories and contributions and common humanity, and that we're sailing on this ship together. And we go back and we look at the educational system from K-12, the inequities begin there. The inequities in the curriculum begin there. And so when we wonder why things haven't changed, it's because people aren't built this way with the, they don't come out of the womb evil or come out of the womb negative. There is a process, and that process is in that educational system that begins to make us believe that, yes, this law's right, or this law's wrong, or this law's adequate, and we're protecting ourselves, and those people are defined this way because I've read it and I've studied. That whole educational system and the way teachers are taught to teach. We really need to go back and do a complete overhaul for that next generation, because otherwise we're going to keep living in these cages. The cycle.
That is such a key of it all, right? I have worked in public education pretty much my whole life, and I love it. But I have seen so much of that inequity, and it's just so shocking. And when I first learned about, which is now well known, but if people aren't familiar, this idea of school to prison pipeline, it's so heartbreaking, but it's so real that there are schools in, neighborhoods living in poverty that are maybe not as extreme as what you shared, Niyi, about apartheid schools, which is shocking. I never knew that art would be illegal. That's shocking. But it's not illegal, but it's not there. The schools
Okay.
are very like regimented, and there's not a space for that kind of creativity and freedom, and there's more punitive actions, and it does turn into that pipeline. Something that I didn't share earlier, that I want to just bring to the fore in relationship to this conversation about making a difference, is Adnan, you had this incredible experience while you were incarcerated, which I want to share, and maybe you can speak a little bit about it. So while he was incarcerated, Adnan inspired, launched, and worked on the felony murder rule legislation, the Senate Bill 1437, with his organization Restore Justice. The bill passed, and after serving 16 years, he got out in January 2019, the first person resentenced under the bill he helped to create.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's right. We should take a moment to celebrate that. It's so
Yeah.
incredible.
Oh,
And it just speaks so clearly to this idea we can make a difference. We don't have to be, the millionaire or whatever. We can find a way. And I can't think of a better example. So do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. And thanks for the congratulatory and the hands and the snaps. I appreciate it. It never gets old in terms of like the freedom part of it. But I think what I want to say to that is it wasn't me. It requires it, and it required a lot of people. It required marginalized people, impacted people, currently formerly incarcerated people. It required, and this is a coalition, it required people of privilege to utilize their privilege. Didn't have to do with money all the time. And a lot of times it had to do with getting a vote in the Senate or the Assembly, right? Hey, I'm a wealthy person in your district. This just straight up, just to name that. That's sadly how our democracy works. And so utilizing privilege the proper way, it required all of that to organize and mobilize from inside and outside of a prison facility. In the documentary, you see Aggie coming into, Aggie, Cat, Helena, Darren Walker, people who are in this documentary come into San Quentin. I make a small little cameo. You can see like the side of my head in one of the pictures they used. So that's my claim to fame in Aggie. Yeah, there's a profile. Like, I know it's me. You don't know, but I know. But my point in bringing that up is that I met Aggie, Cat, Helena there. I met them in San Quentin while I was still serving a life sentence. But also, oh, that's an important call. Is that?
no, sorry.
Yeah, no. But also it's not just that I met them, they met me. They met us. So the value here wasn't, oh my gosh, here's Agnes Gunn with the Liechtenstein painting she just sold, and she's coming because she feels sorry for us, or she has pity for us. No, it wasn't that. She created a fund to uplift and value impacted people. So it wasn't so much, because there's a power dynamic that still plays into, we're looking down on you, we have more wealth, we have more power, we have influence, versus what we did with the legislation that freed me eventually was equaling everyone. And it also wasn't like downplaying privilege, like, hey, your privilege, come down below us. It wasn't even that. It was equal. That's what equality is. And I want to mention really quick, because your last question about where do we, what advice would we give somebody who is conflicted in picking a bunch of movements? First and foremost, I want to say is go with your passion, and that will drive you. That will take you the direction you want to go. Whether it's climate change, whether it's mass incarceration, whether it's policy, whatever it is, your passion will take you there. But furthermore, and more importantly, in my opinion, your passion will sustain you, because it's hard work. It is treacherous work. It is work that will drain your soul. It will drain your spirit. You are up against a monster. You are under-resourced. It is extremely difficult in whatever we choose to combat is extremely difficult, but your passion will push you through it. I was serving a life sentence since the age of 18, and 16 years later, the law ends up passing through a lot of our hard work. And it was that passion, a collective passion, that technically, quite literally freed me. So first and foremost, I want to say that it's going to be your individual passion that's going to take you there and wherever it may be, and then sustain you after that. The second thing I want to say is that no matter what you choose, there is an interconnectedness of these movements that come together. So mass incarceration, criminal justice reform, whatever you want to call it, abolition, and climate change come together. If COVID has revealed anything, is our interconnectedness. If you're not safe, I'm not safe. So labor movement and mass incarceration, teachers, you talked about teachers, unions and that movement and school to prison pipeline is all interconnected. So all of these movements eventually and should and do come together. LGBTQ. And one thing that you see in Aggie is the intergenerational and the overlapping of movements, right? And Aggie there, you see Aggie with Cat, with gay rights in the streets with the signs, right? Even in MoMA, where you have this picture that's really iconic to me, a bunch of white men, and here's this woman, Aggie, sitting in the middle of MoMA.
Yeah, right? That struck me too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just in the movie itself, you see LGBTQ, you see the AIDS crisis, you see mass incarceration, you see art, you see all of these, and then in the movie again in itself, and I'm sorry, I'm getting excited because I really love how even the storytelling of the movie is generational, intergenerational activism. You have Aggie, Cat, and then Aggie's grandchildren who are Cat's children. There's 3 generations in this documentary that tell the story of time and presence through art. So that's how I kind of want to just close off that part about your question, is the proximate part and the interconnected of generations, and your passion that's going to drive you and connect you through within movements will be the first and foremost most important thing.
That is so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What is really unique about Aggie though is she got younger. And when I talk about getting younger, as she grew, as she aged, she got younger. Her thinking got more radical. It got more, actually, it got so much more constructive in terms of humanity that you say, wait a minute, usually as people advance, they get more conservative. And I think that's why she earned the attacks. She got attacks from colleagues when she went to San Quentin to say, hey, why would you even go there? And I mean, not at your age, not in your standing and status. So I think if she could do it, I mean, there's hope. There's a lot of hope. I mean, it wasn't about money for her. It wasn't about money. Money meant nothing. And you could see that in terms of the selling of the painting and using it for the betterment of humanity. So I just want to add that to what you say, man. I mean, like I said, I saw it twice over again. Like, oh my God, this is unbelievable.
I love that. I know I did the same thing. I watched it and then I watched it again. And you find new things. So I do encourage that. I wanted something that you said, Adnan, it reminded me of something that I think is relevant to share it about not looking down or looking up. And I feel like our society is so structured about like positionality and who's where and how do I fit in? And yet we're all humans. And like you said, COVID has shown us that, and hopefully we learn from it. But something happened in a class that, Mark, you were in, because one of the fellow students shared this. I don't know if you remember. I was talking about people first language, which if you're not familiar, it's about putting the person first, a person who is homeless, a person who is incarcerated. So I'm sharing this with the students in our arts facilitator training, and one of them raised his hand, Shinti, and he says, a person who is president. And I was like, exactly. And I loved it because it blew my mind, because I'm like, yeah, I'm always thinking, oh, the people who are, something that's challenging, but it's also for the people in power. And I just felt like what you shared about equality, like that really spoke to it. So yeah, I just thought that was an interesting one to add. Eva, what would you say to students who are in art and design students who want to get involved or use their art in this way, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess my first thought when you posed the question, like, how can you make a change if it seems intimidating to do so, was, and this isn't art related really, but to make friends with someone who has very different opinions than yourself is kind of like the smallest and a very difficult thing to do for a lot of people. I guess this also just kind of going back to this idea of empathy for me, which is, you know, especially over the last 4 years, it's been such a polarizing time in the United States and in other countries where, you know, we see the rise of the far right, which is terrifying. And then also, I feel like to some extent, my challenge to myself is to yeah, that idea of thinking of everyone as a person, but also like, can I have a warm, compassionate conversation with someone who has very different opinions than me? And I think that's kind of where, you know, of course, it's even more noble to go and devote your life to activism. But for those of you who might not be in that spot, you know, maybe that's one move to make, even as we see like something like Thanksgiving coming up and having to, you know, perhaps sharing time with family members that we can't agree with, even something like that. How do we have that compassion? But as far as art goes, I mean, art is so expansive, right? There's so many different things you can do with it, and so many ways that it exists. I mean, there are so many different art worlds, right? There is not one art world, despite what we might hear. So it's
Well,
hard
I think
to
what
come
you
up with one answer about that. I mean, I guess I'll say that my challenge right now is working on some public art projects and public art proposals, some that come through and some that don't, and figuring out how something in public view can have an importance to people around it, as far as history, culture, justice. You know, how do we make work in that kind of realm that's meaningful to people around those topics? So I don't have an answer about how to do that. I'm just trying to chip away at it. So actually, if anyone else has answers, please send them my way.
I love
It's a good
that.
question.
I think that's so cool, because what we're working on and that we're all evolving, it's so important to remember, kind of like what Niyi said, right? Like that Aggie kind of growing younger, growing more radical. We got to keep evolving and keep questioning and not know. Like, it's really great to not know something, because it leads to openings. I have only one question from the audience, so I'm gonna ask it because this wonderful person asked. And if anyone else has any, guys, we have about 10 minutes. And if we don't have any, I'll give everybody a moment to just kind of close. So we have from Otto, thank you, hi Otto. We have, will there be a sequel? I was extremely interested in the prison reform part of the film and want to see more.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's called Cat.
What? But there won't be a sequel in the sort of traditional sense of another film that follows up on these per se. But I am working on a really big project with Adnan and some others called Just Media, which is an effort to create a platform for narrative change as a resource for the movement to end mass incarceration and to fight for criminal justice reform. And the platform will allow for all different kinds of films and videos about the subject, most broadly defined, to be accessible in one place online so that people can interact with it, whether they're filmmakers or whether they're activists or whether they're lawyers or parents. But it really is about realizing that the media, to points everybody's been making, that the media can help us change the language and really change the story, and that we need to lead with our story, with the opening. I mean, we talked earlier about also addressing healing, and Malcolm X said, where there is a scar, there is the potential for a transformation. That is where you're hurt is where you heal. and it allows a seed to turn a bad into a good. And I feel like that those are the elements, the story Adnan just told, things that Mark has been saying this whole time, that there are ways that if we hear each other's stories, we can change how we even define criminality, how we understand violence, what role those things play in our day-to-day lives, and how we are relying on them right now to continue this society or this sort of fragile democracy that we are pursuing. And that it's when we actually look at anti-black racism, and specifically at the violence that has been for centuries used to reinforce that, and that is what is epitomized by the criminal justice system. We need to keep talking about these things. So to Otto's point, yes, we are in a constant process. There won't be a second movie, especially not one called Cathrine, but not on it. But they're all related, as you can see with what I tried to do with my own mother's life. You turn around, and even my kids, I have 4 kids, are all that age. They're all between 16 and 24. They're like, I don't know what my next step is. How does that determine who I am? I think we all have that question. And you don't know it before you get there, but you can turn around. They say, your life is so internally coherent. Every single thing you've done has led one thing to the next. It's all related. And I'm like, I didn't know, especially in COVID, what I'm doing the next day. I didn't know I was going to have children. I didn't know I was going to have 4 children. I didn't know, I didn't start calling myself a filmmaker really until like 10 years ago. And I've been doing it for almost 40, since I was born. I'm not 40. No. And so there's this sense of like, how do we get to where we are? Like, what comes next? I love this question about a sequel, because it allows me to play with the meaning of progress and the meaning of continued work, and the dynamic, active moment that we are in together. All of us right now today, and then in other moments, how we'll go off, and all the people. I wish I could see all your faces. So.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. There is another question that focuses on your work, Cathrine, so maybe we'll just go to that since you're speaking about your future project. Amy noted that throughout your work, including Chavela and Dispatches from Cleveland, that she saw a theme about, sorry, I'm trying to paraphrase, studies of how activism and portraits of women leaders. And she says, I wonder if you could address how you think crafting portraits of women's power illuminate their self-determination.
That's fabulous. When I had been, I started making films in collectives. I was talking to Niyi earlier about going to South Africa and working on a film about the Weekly Mail with a collective called Paper Tiger Television. Then I worked in this collective Diva TV in ACT UP. And I still work very collectively and collaboratively and on impact strategy baked in. Collaborating with partner organizations with goals of policy change and mobilizing people and whatnot. And when I went to start making the film that is called Born to Fly, which is about the dancer Elizabeth Struble, who walks down buildings and has her dancers jump off bridges and things like that, I went to some of my partner people and partner funders and people who'd worked with me on this democracy and radical right and abortion providers and like films that had very clear impact strategies connected to them. And I said, do you think anybody will support this? Because I didn't know how to get support from other people. I only knew how to work within the social justice activist field. And she said, are you kidding? Women's power, girls' power, that's the most political thing there is. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And so I did make that film. And I do kind of see this as a third in a triptych. And I could have called Born to Fly Streb. And then it would have been Streb, Chavela, and Aggie. And they, there's a feminine power, if you will, but there's also the motivation of the arts that I think is the through line, even more than the fact that they're all women. They're also all elders. They're people who've lived very long, full lives and have a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience, even if they are getting younger, and even if they are, or because they are so committed to growing and changing and not figuring out who they are and then stifling themselves in one location. So they have that in common. But I don't make my films by determining what they're going to be about and then going out and making them. They always come to me. So I would say it was pretty happenstance, or this internal coherence my kids insist on, of my life, that everything's so well connected. Thank you for the question.
That's awesome. Thank you. You know, it reminds me of something that Eva and Cathrine and I all have in common, that all of our mothers have done work inside of prisons. My mom was a volunteer for like 20 years in juvenile hall, which inspired me to make this program. And Eva, I think your mom also does gardening work in prisons, right?
She helped put together a Japanese garden in a prison in Oregon.
Wow.
She's a sculptor, yeah.
So it's so interesting. Thank you. So we have a couple more questions. Oh.
I just thought you were going to say one thing we all have in common is our mother's names are Aggie. And I was like, oh, that's not.
No, but it's pretty cool. Actually, my mom came with me to the prisons many times when she was, you know, in her 70s. And once she ran into someone who she knew in juvenile hall. And so they would connect all the time. I was like, my mom knows someone here. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So we have another question that I'm gonna kind of direct towards our faculty, and then wrap up with a story that Mark's gonna share that I think will be inspirational. I can show the image, maybe you can speak about that if that sounds okay. So maybe if you guys could just give like a kind of quick comment on this one. It's a combination of questions from, oh dear, what happened? Sorry, I just made the image look weird. It's a combination of questions from Eric and Janaea, and they're both interested in how the university can be a space to continue this kind of art and activism work. And Janaea says, curious how to navigate doing artist advocacy or activist work with the workplace, especially when you work for an organization that has a large need to change. And so, yeah, how do we, that's all of our organizations, because we have such systemic racism, among other things, as we've seen recently. But how do we work within that? How do we bring this change to the spaces? Does either of the faculty want to speak to that in relation to a university? Niyi, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. Just stopping the phones from ringing. I would say that we don't give up, and that we just have to continue to point it out, and because ultimately it's for the good of everyone at the end. It's for the good of not just people who are within that system, but those who would inherit the system once we leave that system, because we're not going to be in these systems permanently. And we have a finite amount of time, just like we're looking at a lot of our emeriti colleagues who've done their time and moved on. And so basically, we just, it has to be a continuous agitation and a reminder that, you know, we need to make those changes. We have something to live for, and that's worth living for, and a legacy that's worth bequeathing to the next generation. Otherwise, they'll be in the same, I mean, and they'll wonder why we didn't do anything to change it. You know, so for those of us who are in a system right now that has a lot of imbalance, inequity, whether it's in the curriculum, whether it's in hiring, whether it's in the way people are treated, the thing is not to keep quiet about it, and always, you know, be vigilant about it.
That's
jump in and add to that really quick. I 100% agree with Niyi, and I think that and also know through personal experience that abuse continues and thrives in secrecy and in silence. And so first and foremost, you have to say something, but I think there's also an art to how and that's wisdom. Wisdom is how to say something, when's the right time and the right approach to who. And so I would just encourage people to do what we've been talking about here, do within the organization, micro movements, but not to damage or harm. I 100%, I don't believe in punishment. The root of punishment is to hurt. But I do believe in consequences, which is to, not to hurt, but to make right.
Yeah.
And so I do believe in the consequences, and I think the path to consequences is accountability. And so with that, I would suggest within organizations, something that I'm working on now, not within just my organization, but with other organizations, is how do you hold someone, especially someone in position of power? I mean, we're seeing this throughout our nation, throughout the world, actually, but within the organization, mini movement, mini organizing, language, right? How, kind of like around with each other, but in order to, to make change and be willing to hold someone accountable and help them in being held accountable, which may require people stepping down. That is not, a void of consequences. So just I would suggest that.
Yeah, no, that's really incredible, and it's great to hear. That's a great question. That was a great question. So there was a kind of a cool story of transformation that I thought might be nice to hear before we go. Mark, did you want to speak about what you all did at at Pelican Bay? Should I share the picture?
Definitely. If you could share the picture.
I will.
And this is what the gentleman on the inside did. This is me and my colleague right here, but you can see this painting is on the wall. But to give you a little backstory about this wall and the corridor it's in, this is part of what's known as the segregated housing unit. So a few years ago in California, they would send individuals to the segregated housing units for the rest of their life, where they would have no contact with another human being until they passed away. I know an individual who spent 38 years without touching another soul. And this is where it actually happened at. But it's starting to go through a transformation now. It's no longer the segregated housing unit. It went from a level 4 to a level 2. And the gentlemen who are confined there drew this picture on the wall, and the whole hallway, it's like halfway down the corridor, which probably runs maybe 40 yards. And they're gonna do the whole 40 yards. They're probably around 20 yards in. They started painting this. And to me, that really is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Like all these artists are currently incarcerated there, and they're gonna do that entire wall. And there's a real transformation going on inside of that prison. And it's good to see that instead of someone spending, 40 years in a cell by themselves. I think that's a real testament to the change.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking of that and sharing that image. I feel like it's a perfect space to wrap up. We are at time. We have, while you're going out, if you could stay a few minutes and watch, we have a music video that was brought from Aubin Pictures that we're going to play. And I just, before we start, just want to thank each of you, Mark, Adnan, Niyi, Cathrine, Eva. It was such a pleasure to be with you today. And thank you to everyone who joined us.
Yeah.
And I guess we can start the video.
Brilliant. Production secrets. Into the unknown. Like wherever your note is, keep the notes. So we're gonna just do the same spot and go full speed ahead. Okay, great. We figured it out. What is the measure of a life? What is our place in this design? I dream of a day when the truth is told, and the sign of our worth is in the hearts we hold. Can we see a path forward in the ink of the pen and the time that we spend? I will fly into the unknown. Just imagine, please imagine with me. Is everything all set in stone? So many of us feel alone. Oh, I dream of a day when the borders break and we see the change that we all can make. Can we find the deepest courage in the lives of our friends and the things we can mend? I will fly into the unknown. I will find ways to be free. Just imagine with me. Just imagine, please imagine with me. Just imagine with me. Just imagine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me-
Kat, do you want, Kat?
That it was obviously was a little bit janky, a little bit in and out of sync, but it is available online. Thank you, Adnan. It sounded fine, so that's why I wanted to keep watching it. The theme song at the end of the film, and Samora Pinder Hughes wrote it. And if you listen to the lyrics, I think it really is about our shared goal. And
Who's the artist? Who's singing, Kat?
Yeah.
My youngest child, Tenzin.
Beautiful. That's what I was thinking. I was like, I recognize him. So beautiful. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to all of those for being here and for all of you. And let's keep moving forward, in solidarity. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, you all. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, giving us hope.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Mark.